The clients in your client contract agreed to allow you to use the photography from their event. So why are you being sued? Find out in today's video. Hey out there, welcome back to Wedding Industry Law. My name is Rob. I am a wedding industry attorney, and in today's video, we're going to be talking about the risky world that we live in when we use photographs from a wedding based solely on contract language in our client contract, in which the client is agreeing to let us use those photographs. So the scenario is your client, you're a wedding professional. Okay. So you're not a photographer. You're another type of wedding professional. I'm not saying that wedding photographers are not professional. They are fantastic people. You're, on the other hand, a florist, a DJ, a venue, anyone other than the principal photographer. In your client contract, you're saying, client, you're going to allow me to use the photos from the wedding that your primary photographer uses, with the inference that you don't need to go to the photographer to get the permission. The client is providing all the permission that you need to use the photograph. So you can either go to the client's Facebook page or whatever, their wedding page, or even the primary photographer's page, take those photographs without telling anybody and use them in your own marketing. That is your thought process in this contract clause that's in your contract that the client signs. So the client is allowing you to do that without any further permissions. That's the scenario. That's the setup. Here's where you are in risky grounds if you are a wedding professional and you are operating under some type of similar circumstance. The risk is that the client does not have the authority to give you that type of permission. Typically, only the copyright holder of that image can authorize the use of that image by other parties. Okay. So it's kind of, in some instances, we call that a license. So in other words, the photographer in most instances retains the right, the copyright in those images, and provides the client a limited license for what we would call personal use. Putting it on the client's refrigerator, sending a copy to grandmama house, turn them into, refrigerator magnets. What personal use? So non-commercial use. You're not going to, the client typically is not going to be able to sell those photos to Hallmark.com or something. So typically, most of the time, the primary photographer retains the copyright to those images, meaning they're the ones that can say what happens to that image moving forward. The client typically only retains a personal use, which would not allow them to give someone else the right to use those images for marketing or commercial purposes. That's the typical way in which wedding photography contracts work. So if your contract says client lets you use those photographs, then it is likely that the client would then be breaching the contract that they have with the primary photographer. Okay. So the client doesn't have permission, so they're breaching. And so possibly because the client didn't have the right to give you those photographs to use in your marketing, you potentially could both be liable in either a breach of contract case or most likely a copyright infringement case. So just because the client gives you permission doesn't mean that you do not also need the permission from the primary photographer. Otherwise, at the end of the day, you could end up a defendant in a copyright infringement claim, or at minimum, a breach of contract claim. So how do we avoid this scenario? The main way to do that is to always get permission from the individual that took the photograph. So that, I'm not saying that 100% of the time that's the person that owns the 100% of the copyright, but likely that's the case. So go to the photographer and go, hey, I want to use the images that you're taking from this this place. Is that okay? And they'll say yes or no, and then you can have whatever interaction you want with that primary photographer. That's one of the safest ways to prevent becoming a defendant in a copyright infringement claim. Then with your client contract, you typically can work out the other side of the coin, which is, and we've talked about this in other videos, but the right of publicity, or the right of using the client's likenesses as they appear in the images. So you're, by going to both the photographer and the client in the contract, you're covering both sides of that coin, the copyright issue as well as the right of publicity, or the right of the use of likeness as it appears in the images. I know it's a mouthful, but that's the safest thing to do. If you altogether don't want to do any of that, and you've been doing this for years, I've been doing this for years, Rob, and I've never had a problem. The client lets me do it. I just scrape the images from the internet, from the photographer's website, or the Facebook page and nobody says anything. Nobody's the wiser. At minimum, then, if you want to continue to do that, again, you're running the risk of getting sued for copyright infringement. But because it is a contract and the client is agreeing to this, you can essentially have the client indemnify or hold you harmless to the extent that they don't have the appropriate permission. So in other words, the client is agreeing to let you use the images, okay, with the understanding that they have the authority to do that, okay, which typically they don't, but they're agreeing that they do. And if they don't, or if there's some issue with it, then if you are sued, then you would have the indemnity clause in your contract that the client signs, that the client would have to step in and indemnify you, meaning that they would cover any of your losses in a potential infringement lawsuit. But that's a lot of crap. That's a whole lot of stuff to explain to the client. I just don't think that's the best way to do it. I think, like I said, the best way, if you want to use images, is to get permission from the primary photographer. That's going to be the easiest, less risky way to do it. Now, one final thing with this is, and again, this is something that I've covered in other videos, but typically in your client contract, you can request permission to send your own set photographer, your own professional photographer to the event to capture images that you will retain the copyright ownership of. So in other words, not only can you break out your iPhone, but you can also send your own professional there to get shots of you doing your business at that event. So that way you're not even having to worry about the primary photographer. The disclaimer on that is you want to make sure that that would not violate any type of exclusivity that the primary photographer has with the client. So there's a lot of stuff in this. Copyright is its own beast, its own animal. So I hope that at least gives you the basics, because we've just scratched the surface of some of this stuff. But by and large, if you are operating in the way that we described, you are running a risk with regard to your business. So take heed, everybody out there, wedding professionals out there. If you enjoyed the content of this video, please be sure to like and subscribe, hit the notification bell. If you are listening to this on I was going to say podcast device. If you're listening to this on some type of device in podcast form, meaning just the audio, go check us out on YouTube. See the background. I'm not quite moved into my new office. So that explains why there's papers and boxes and crates everywhere. But there is a YouTube channel. Be sure to check us out. One final plug, everybody. Every Thursday at 4 p.m. Eastern Time, 1 p.m. Pacific Time, I host a room called Wedding Industry Law Hour on Clubhouse. So if you're on Clubhouse or interested in Clubhouse, get on there. I'm at Wedding Lawyer. Come find me. Every Thursday, you can ask questions. We have conversations about the legal side of running a business. So I encourage everybody to check out the Wedding Industry Law Hour on Clubhouse Thursdays at 4 p.m. Eastern, 1 p.m. Pacific. Basically an hour-long question and answer session where I answer all your questions. And new episodes, new videos on this YouTube channel out every Monday. Be sure to check us out. And with that, folks, we'll see you next time.